X-Men. It's a franchise that's been going on for more than 20 years, but believe it or not, I've never actually seen a movie with the X-Men title. I've seen Logan, I've seen the Deadpool films, and I've seen the New Mutants, but I've never seen any of the X-Men movies until about a week ago when I watched them all. And obviously you've got the original X-Men, you've got these prequel X-Men, you've got X-Men that time travel, you've got spin-offs, you've got origin stories, you've got everything going on in this franchise. But after watching all, I've formed a list from worst to best, really looking at what makes some of these X-Men films so great and what makes some of them not great at all. We've got 13 movies to look at, so let's get started with 13th, the worst of the worst, the New Mutants. This is the most recent. I believe it came out in 2020, so yeah, it was only last year, and I did actually do a review for it on the channel. Obviously, I hadn't seen the other X-Men movies at the time, so I couldn't quite take in everything that was going on in the movie. But I do remember it really had no substance. The characters were quite hollow. The only good person in there was Anya Taylor-Joy, and that's just because she's a very good actress. But the story seemed to be a whole lot of build-up to not a lot of end product. It didn't involve any other X-Men characters that we know and love. And the production of this movie was a problem. This was a movie that I think had originally been teased in 2017, so everyone thought it'd come out in 2018 or 2019, but it just kept getting delayed. And from what I heard, it was actually meant to originally be set in the 70s, so it'd be one of those prequel X-Men movies, but then they just set it in the modern day anyway. It's kind of hard to find a place for this in the timeline where it fits in. And you know, when it got to that ending with the giant bear, just, you know, that kind of just summed it up. This movie's stupid and it's not really an important part of the X-Men franchise, and it's something you can definitely skip. In 12th is the second most recent X-Men film, which is X-Men Dark Phoenix. This movie was just bad, I'm afraid. As I'll get to when talking about Days of Future Past, which changes the timeline, they kind of kill off characters in this movie that were originally alive in the original X-Men movie, so that's a problem there for me already. You know, I like the characters in this film, but I found some of them really whiny, some of them really uninteresting. The side plot in this movie as well was just so stupid. You know, some aliens are just on Earth. Just aliens, like it's not even a big deal. They just play it off as a little side plot. And obviously the movie centers around Jean Grey, and she's a character who throughout the franchise I've never actually found all that interesting, but they seem to put so much focus on her, and I'm just sort of like, well, I could really, you know, live without her in this X-Men franchise. I think when you've got James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, you know, playing Professor X and Magneto in your movie, you've got to make the movie about them, center it around them. In this movie, it shouldn't have even been about the Dark Phoenix. It should have been about Magneto doing something and McAvoy trying to stop him. And like I said, it just doesn't seem to correspond with the timeline, and it just adds more confusion into this franchise. The one thing I noted about this movie that I thought that's good is the soundtrack. As soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, this soundtrack's pretty good. It's much better than what I've heard in all the previous X-Men films. And I looked into it, and of course it's because it's by Hans Zimmer. This is the only X-Men soundtrack he's done. It's superb. It's much better than all the other X-Men soundtracks, but that's about the only positive from this movie. Coming in at 11th, X-Men Apocalypse. A place where this X-Men franchise suffers a lot is from the villains. This villain was extremely meh, extremely boring, and as this is a film after Days of Future Past, it seems to create more problems with the timeline again. I found there was an overload of characters in this, to be honest. It was kind of hard to balance between everyone. Magneto is doing his own thing in this film. I did find his backstory in this near the beginning quite interesting though. It was kind of good to sympathize with him. But you know, he couldn't get enough screen time. James McAvoy couldn't get enough screen time. No one could really get enough screen time. The best parts of this movie were really early on. I love seeing these characters in their downtime, like James McAvoy, well, as Professor X, recruiting students. You know, he recruits Cyclops in this film, and you meet a Jean Grey for the first time when she's a bit younger. That was cool, and I really liked the Logan cameo in this when they release him in the cage and he's going nuts. It's cool, like you get little Logan cameos in a lot of these films, and that was probably the highlight of the movie, to be honest. As I said, the villain was really boring, just not interesting. I found myself bored at times with this movie, and it was overly long too. Coming in at 10th, The Wolverine. Now, I wouldn't say this is a bad movie, it was just a bit dull. The best way I could describe this is if the X-Men movies were the main quest in a video game, the Wolverine was a side quest, and it was a boring one as well. It just didn't feel like there was a lot of stake in this movie. It didn't feel like it was really about character progression and about adding on to the story of the Wolverine. It just felt like this is something that happened to him one week in his life. It was very well acted from Jackman though, and credit to him because he's always just on top of his game. I found the supporting cast were pretty good as well. Basically anyone that was, you know, on the good side, on Wolverine's side of this movie, was very good. The villains were Really hollow though, pretty boring, and the plot just wasn't all that great, but it's not a bad watch. It's one of those, if it was on late night TV, you probably would just stick it on to have on. Not bad, not great, it's just not really worth watching. In ninth, we've got X2, so X-Men 2, the second movie that they actually released, a direct sequel to the first X-Men, and just because it's so low down in the list doesn't make it a bad movie by any means. Everything ahead of it is just a pretty good movie, to be fair. This for me just kind of let down after the first movie. It was a bit convoluted, it was too long, and the villain plot in this, it was another Magneto villain plot. I found it was too grand scheme to really feel an impact, and the way I feel is that villains that are more personal to the hero you sort of get more invested in, but when it's something big like world domination, whatever, you're just a bit well, they're gonna do it anyway because the world's got to be saved. When it's something personal to the hero, you sort of think, I wonder if they are actually gonna be able to overcome this villain, because even though less is at stake, more is at stake. But you know, this movie was well acted, it was funny, you know, good characters again, everyone's on top of their game, and it's a decent sequel to the first movie. In eighth, we have X-Men The Last Stand. This is the third movie, direct sequel to X2. And as I said before about Jean, it's kind of the same thing in here. Obviously this is original Jean where she's like older, but it's kind of hard to give a damn about her. Like, she comes back from the dead because she died in X2, but she's just a bit of a bitch in this movie, and she's like evil and possessed by the Dark Phoenix, and she's doing all this crazy stuff. I just found the villain side of this pretty boring. In a sense, it was more personal to the heroes, but it was still a case of she's got all this power so she can cause chaos throughout the world. The pacing was better though because it was shorter than X2, so it flowed a bit better, but it is a shame we didn't get more of certain characters, and some characters they just killed off really suddenly, and it's just a bit like, whoa, that's it, they're gone, because the way they died is so abrupt. You're expecting them to come back later in the movie like they haven't really died, but they died in this movie. But you know what it's like with X-Men, they just bring characters back willy-nilly. In seventh, we've got Deadpool 2. Of course, this is the sequel to the first Deadpool, and it's another good laugh, funny movie. I found the story was a bit messier in this though. Obviously they play it off with breaking the fourth wall and Deadpool himself taking jabs at the timeline, at the story, how random it is. So that kind of gives it a pass in the sense of like, oh, well, they're aware that the movie is a bit messy. But also, the movie is messy, so it's kind of hard to enjoy it as much. I think it's a shame that they killed off Vanessa at the beginning of this. She was really good in the first film, and I loved the connection between her and Deadpool in this movie, and it just seemed like a bit of a miss to not have her in the film. I really enjoyed Josh Brolin's performance as Cable. I thought he was great. I love the chemistry between him and Ryan Reynolds as well, you know, Deadpool calling him Thanos and all this, just funny. This is a solid movie and a decent sequel. It's just not as good as the first. In sixth, we've got the first X-Men. Considering this was made in 2000, when I was watching it, I was a bit precautious, thinking, oh, is this going to be like quite a cheesy movie? Not at all, to be honest. It aged really well. The characters were really engaging and fun. Everyone did really good performances. It's really easy to just find these characters likable straight away, especially Wolverine and Rogue. I thought they were pretty much the best elements of this movie. Once again though, the villain plot isn't overly interesting because it's another big grand scheme type plot to turn loads of people into mutants, like a load of people in New York, I think. So that was a bit meh. But this was the stepping stone, this is where it started, and after watching this, you definitely want more. So it did its job very well, and they provided more, and the demand was clearly high after this movie was released. In fifth, we've got Days of Future Past. Now this is a movie that I think is great, but also terrible at the same time. This is the second prequel, and they tell an interesting story, very interesting to start with. You kind of bounce back between the present, or maybe the future, and the past. So you actually get both the original cast and the younger cast in this movie. And essentially Wolverine is sent back in time from the future to the past to alter some stuff in the past to save the future. And that was really cool to see the cast, you know, young and old, and just seeing them all interact. I thought the story was really interesting as well. You're very invested to see whether they can pull it off. The humor is great. James McAvoy is superb in these prequel movies. He's definitely the standout. He's just brilliant. And there were some really good additions as well. I really loved the addition of Peter Maximoff, who I recently saw, of course, in the WandaVision TV show. But he was so good in this movie. I love the scene of him in the kitchen. But as I've said, the main problem with this movie is the fact that it messes around with the timeline. Essentially, what this movie does is makes the first 3 X-Men movies completely irrelevant. None of the events in those movies happened because of what this movie started and what the following prequel movies created. It causes a serious chain reaction of messing up what was done prior and really confusing us as a viewer. What the hell's going on in this timeline? What really happened and what didn't? It's a shame because I think the concept was cool, but I think they should have done something that didn't involve time travel, or if they did, not allow it to completely alter what happened in the prior movies. I just think it's a strange choice to make, to say, you know what, we're going to make a time travel movie. It's going to make the first 3 movies that we made completely irrelevant though, because none of that actually happened. I just think it makes it hard to rewatch those first 3 movies now, because you're watching it, you're thinking, well, none of this even happened anyway. You know, it's not in the timeline anymore. It's a weird movie, this one. I love it, but I also hate what it did for the franchise. In 4th then, we've got X-Men First Class. This was the first prequel movie, and I've got to say from the start, the casting was brilliant, spot on. Like I said, James McAvoy, superb. Michael Fassbender, superb. Jennifer Lawrence, really good as Mystique. And you get a nice bit of downtime in this movie for a majority of the early parts of this movie. You get to see the build-up of these characters. You get to see James McAvoy as Professor X recruiting, creating the first X-Men team. The villain plot again in this movie was pretty grand scheme, but it was better. Kevin Bacon is actually a really good villain. I also like Fassbender's role in this. He starts off as a hopeful character and you see what turns him vengeful. This was a really good movie, definitely one I want to rewatch. It was a bit cheesy at times. I found the music was a bit over the top. I mean, this movie with a Hans Zimmer score would have been awesome. But overall, this is a really good movie and definitely the best of the prequel X-Men movies. In 3rd, we've got X-MenOrigins Wolverine. Now, this is a bit of a strange movie. It doesn't actually start off the strongest for me. The intro seems a bit kind of weird, a little bit rushed. Odd bits of CG, odd bits of camera work. You kind of get the impression that this isn't going to be a very well-made movie. But the story moves quick, and we always wanted to know, well, I did, especially watching the first few X-Men movies. I was like, well, how did he get these crazy claws made out of metal? What is his story? And they give you that in this. Of course, it is Wolverine's origin. I just found it really interesting. You really get behind Wolverine in this movie and his motivations. Love the people he had with him helping him in this movie. I thought Will.i.am was really good. I like Wolverine's brother as a villain. I like Stryker in this movie. The Stryker they used in this movie was much better than the Stryker from X-Men 2. Really seems evil, really seems menacing. The Deadpool thing was really cool as well. I know that's kind of weird because they made Deadpool and he's not like that. Weird timeline and all that crap. I mean, who even knows at this stage if X-Men Origins is canon after what Days of Future Past did to the timeline? It probably isn't. But this movie just got better and better and better the more you watched. The plot twists were really good. I didn't see them coming. This movie catches you off guard. It doesn't go the way you think it's gonna go. And it was brutal, it was ruthless. It was more ruthless than what we'd seen recently in X-Men movies. I really enjoyed this movie, and that's for me why it goes 3rd. Now, 1st and 2nd was always gonna be tough to call, but after thinking about it for a while, I came to my decision. So, in 2nd place, we have Logan. Now, this is a very different type of X-Men movie. This is R-rated, as they call it, so an 18 plus or maybe 15 plus in the UK. So this film is just brutal. The action and the violence of this is great. Obviously, in every other X-Men film, you've seen Wolverine slash at someone with his claws, but you don't really see any of the damage done. In this, you really see the damage done. You know, decapitation, limbs coming off, just cuts, guts, all this stuff. And the film doesn't pull any punches either. It really is a brutal and just kind of depressing film. You're seeing Wolverine, or Logan, in his worst state. He's really struggling. He can't sleep. He's drinking. He's just doing crappy jobs in the future to make money. Professor X is struggling. He's got like dementia, and obviously with how powerful his mind is, the dementia is causing him to have serious problems with his mind. And you're really feeling for these characters, and you just hope they get a bit of peace in their life, because it's been such a torrid and tough time for him. Now, Daphne Keane plays Lauren, the little Wolverine, Logan's daughter. It's really hard to see a standout child performance, but she was so good in this movie. To be that talented at that age and that badass, just dope. And you really felt for her. You wanted her to be protected, and obviously as the movie progresses, Logan feels for her and they get like an attachment, which is really sweet. And the villain in this movie, played by Boyd Holbrook, he's such a good actor. Really love the work that I've seen him in. I haven't seen him in loads of stuff, but what I have seen him in, he's always really good, and he was superb in this movie, probably his best performance. And for a long movie, it doesn't feel as long as it is, because it's just so well paced and you're so interested and intrigued by the story and the characters. The film doesn't pull any punches. The deaths are brutal, they're heartbreaking, and it's just quite a morbid movie, you know, of a future that is just bleak. There's no more mutants, there's no more X-Men. You know, the great fun times that used to be are just gone. But a brilliant film, executed perfectly, and a perfect end to the X-Men story and Logan's story in particular. So that leaves top spot First place, Deadpool. This film is just, I think it's just a perfect movie. For starters, it's absolutely hilarious. Let's just get that out of the way. So funny, this movie. But then on top of that, it tells a really good story. You really feel for Deadpool. And the love story between him and Vanessa, it just felt really authentic, really fun and sort of immature, but none of this real cheesy bullshit. It was just felt genuine. And as this is his origin story, when things go tits up, you really support him and feel for him, and you want him to succeed. You want him to get the love of his life back, and in the way he's doing it, it's just so many laughs along the way. This movie is the perfect runtime as well. It's about an hour 45, an hour 50. It's not too long, it doesn't drag, it's just perfectly compact. I like the two X-Men they have this movie as well. I think it's Colossus and Super Mega Sonic Warhead, something like that. Just everyone played off each other so well. The guy that works in the mercenary bar, the taxi driver, Vanessa, the villain was cool as well. You know, he did Deadpool dirty and Deadpool wants revenge, and then Vanessa gets involved, and as a viewer, you're just behind it so much. You're really supporting it. You really want Deadpool to succeed and win the day. I like the way this film pokes fun at the X-Men franchise. It pokes fun at the stupid timeline. It pokes fun at all of it. Breaking the fourth wall was always funny in this movie. Sometimes it doesn't always work in a film, but this, it really did work. Obviously that makes you wonder about the timeline, because he's breaking the fourth wall and he seems aware of everything. How does this fit in the timeline? But it's one of those movies, it makes you say, I don't really care if this film fits in the timeline, because it's poking fun at it anyway. This movie is superb, definitely the best addition in this whole X-Men franchise. So that is my list for the X-Men franchise. Overall, I think it's a good bunch of movies. There are some very poor ones, like 3 of them, the bottom 3 that I listed. Apart from that, it's all really solid. My main gripe is Days of Future Past. Despite it being a really good movie, it messed with the timeline and it really just makes it quite confusing. I think the person it affects the worst is probably Wolverine, because in the film Logan he's like really tormented about the past, but we don't even know what his past really is anymore, because everything that happened in the first 3 movies, like the loss he suffered of Jean Grey, the fact that he loved her, that no longer happened because Jean Grey died in Dark Phoenix before Wolverine even would have met her or known who she was. So it's just that element. I just wish they hadn't introduced time travel into this franchise. I think it would have made things a whole lot simpler. And if you're gonna do it, don't mess up the timeline. But hey, it's done. The damage is done. There's still some good movies in this franchise. Definitely some worth watching. But the one that comes out on top is The Mercenary with the Mouth. Thank you very much for watching. Do let me know in the comments, what's your favourite X-Men movie? Which one do you think is the worst? Do you agree with the list? Would you change it? Do let me know. I'll see you guys in the next one.